I am so conservative.
Rationalized in my head. These are things I read in
And
the
I'm going to talk about Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had
remembered at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah.
I am so conservative. If you didn't jump to conclusions, you might not get any exercise. I am so conservative.
And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection. I had 3 cups today, all 22 ounces each, so I am good.
I feel very safe around you, Don.
Good. Our friend, Donald Dr. Williams, I assume he's still our friend after the last time, joins us again, this time to talk about why we lost the culture war and how to make a comeback. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is still Ron Hensel.
As of this moment.
Sponsors of today's webcast. And here is Ronnie Baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where all the counties have reported in. And yes, I am still the senior researcher here. Can't say the same over in Arizona. I don't know if all the votes are they all in yet? I don't know.
I don't know. They keep declaring different winners, so I'm not sure where it resides at the moment.
But I do know this. As of today, there are 8 billion people on the face of the earth, according to the United Nations. Apparently, the guy with the clicker, he hit 8 billion today.
Yeah.
So
his thumb's got to be tired, though, after that.
8 billion clicks. That's a lot of clicks. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is the Grievance Industrial Complex, because things are never bad enough already. Our regular legal disclaimer: our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that would be Dr. Donald Williams, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. This satirical content includes any and all commercials and credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Our regular announcements: notice, the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy it, or if it really annoys you and you want to inflict it on somebody else to ensure your continued access to this program, please go to midwestoutrreach.org. Click the yellow donate button and contribute as you feel led. Never fear. Don't fear. Do not fear. Fear not. This webcast is Y2K compliant, and don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels, of which there are just too many to number at this point in time. How many are there? How many video channels are we on?
Too many. We're streaming to 6. So
6. Ooh. Yeah. Yes, that's
8 billion is a convenient number.
8 billion.
So, and you mentioned 12 more months of summer by you. We had our first snow today going on. It's light, everything's white, and so I saw a meme that really kind of fits my attitude about this. I appreciate the free sample of snow. I think I'll cancel the rest of the subscription for this.
Yeah, my attitude depends on my latitude when it comes to weather. So I found a lower latitude better.
So I had an interesting email, kind of a dialogue last night, where the individual seemed to think that I was personally responsible for all of the ills that have befallen the United States, and that
I thought you were too.
Christian leader and all Christianity in the U.S. Are responsible for the downfall of Western civilization. unlike, those wonderful believers in France and Spain and China and other places. So uh, there is an element, I would suggest, of truth that Christianity in Western civilization has been remiss. I do think that's true. We've written on that. We've talked about that.
Well, Christianity would be perfect if it weren't for all the Christians.
Yeah, we have discussed this at great lengths over the years and written on this exact issue, and that is, as Marxism moved into the United States under John Dewey, who used the educational system to train the students to think like Marxists and socialists, and Antonio Gramsci and his march to the institutions, this has been going on for a long time. Part of it is something that is near and dear to your heart as an educator. So you did an interesting little article called Why We Lost the Culture War and How to Make a Comeback. Did we indeed lose the culture war, at least up to this point? And if so, what is it that you are ascribing that loss to?
Well, I think the culture war, as we have known it, is over, and we, the Christian right, lost. Well, maybe it's not quite over, and we're only losing rather badly. If you quibble over the difference, I think you'll miss the point. Now, it was a war that we were right to fight. For no one who loves his neighbors can be indifferent to how they'll be affected by harmful degradations of the culture that surrounds them. I mean, you can't be indifferent to these changes and claim that you love your neighbor. You just can't. But we might ought to have fought it very differently. We fought on many of the right things, for many of the right things, often not in a wise, sometimes not in a loving way. We were generally right and often argued well, but our arguments had no traction. Why not? How did we manage to lose when, in fact, we had good arguments? We had slam dunk arguments. But the problem was we didn't understand where the real battle was until it was too late, and we probably don't get it yet. Here's what I mean. This is where the battle was. The founding documents of the American Republic, from the Mayflower Compact to the Declaration of Independence to the Constitution, are on our side. They really were. Nobody cares. Nobody can even tell. Nobody thinks it matters. We lost the cultural war on that score because we had lost it earlier on the more basic front of hermeneutics, which is a fancy word for reading. Okay? We lost, in other words, because we did not pay sufficient attention to changes taking place in our schools and colleges in the way writing and reading are taught. A major shift took place there over the last century, one with serious implications for every other issue we deal with. There, now typically the Constitution, like any other literary document studied in our secular schools, including the Bible, no longer has any objective meaning given to it by its authors. It means whatever the interpretive community, in the case of the Constitution, 5 out of 9 people in black robes, it means whatever they think they need or want it to mean. Now, this is a huge problem in itself, but we have a bigger one. Our fellow Christians are fine with this procedure by and large. Why wouldn't they be? It's how they were taught to read themselves. Many Christian institutions of higher education did not stand against this view with sufficient rigor or energy. Why not? Many Christians either didn't understand or just shrugged their shoulders at or even welcomed this change in how we read the world. Some even rejoiced over it as an improvement over the hated modernism that they thought had taken over the Christian movement. How foolish. But we allowed it to happen because its earlier manifestations didn't seem to be a threat. After all, they were happening in English, not in philosophy or theology, and in the reading of artistic works, novels, short stories, plays, and poems, rather than serious political, legal, or religious texts. And who cares what a bunch of effete aesthetic snobs do with incomprehensible text anyway? So, in the secular academy, the old way, the attempt to understand what an author was trying to say to his original audience, believing that what they would have gotten out of his work is and will always remain the authoritative and normative starting point for discussing the meaning of that work, was abandoned as naive, as unworkable, even as perverse. This banishment of authors from their own text was first crystallized by the new critics of the mid 20th century in their concept of the intentional fallacy. In other words, it's a fallacy to worry about what the author intended the work to mean. I mean, that terminology was established, and so people studying these things automatically start out with the idea that looking for authorial intent is in and of itself a fallacy.
Okay, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Did they write books about this?
Yes, they did.
Stanley Fish, is there a meaning in this text? I think was the title.
Okay, so here's my question.
This class, I'm sorry.
If we follow their thinking, they wrote books in which they tried to say meaning about what they were writing. I assume
you're using logic again.
What I'm writing is exactly what I'm writing is only meaningful to me, but it's not true. It's only meaning that's true is whatever meaning you ascribe to it. And so I would then read the book and go, as I read your book, what I understand it to mean in my interpretive method is we should read it in its historical grammatical context in order to understand what the writer actually meant.
The turning point.
What I would do?
Yeah. When the new critics wrote in their books that we should ignore the author in interpretation, did they intend for us to ignore the author's intention in what they wrote? Yeah.
No, they did not.
Yeah, actually they did.
Yeah, well, the new hermeneutics people. Well, actually, this is later than the new hermeneutics. The book came out. It's called "Is There a Text in This Class" by Stanley Fish. Ironically, it came out right around the same time as a book by a guy named Hirsch, Validity and Interpretation, which argued for authorial intent. So we're talking the late 60s. And these two ideas were butting heads at that time. Go ahead.
New
Go ahead,
criticism
Dr. Wood.
dominated the teaching of English from the 30s through the 70s of the 20th century. In the 80s, it started being replaced by postmodernism. And what happened was, the new critics built this wall between the author and the text. And when you get to postmodernism, the wall fell over and obliterated the author and the text and the reader. But the new critics, from the 30s through the 70s, everybody in their English courses was taught this, that in order to understand the text, ignore the author because he's not here. We can't figure out what he meant. We just have to deal with the text. They thought the text could still have meaning on its own, that you could gather from its structure and its use of language, etc. So they were still kind of practicing grammatical historical exegesis, except the author was no longer had anything to do with it. And you can kind of understand why they went that way, because previous to them, the main approach to studying literary text had been biographical. In other words, try to find the author's biography reflected in the work. But the story or the poem isn't about the author, it's about whatever he was writing about. They overreacted to that previous emphasis, got rid of the author altogether, and then they were shocked when the new critic, when the postmodernists came along and took their premises to their further illogical conclusions. So most Christian professors of literature simply picked up the new critical approach without thinking about its implications and about what would happen if some of those ideas were taken further and applied to other kinds of text.
Yeah.
So for a while, the close reading of the details of the text that they favored produced genuine insights into works of literary art. But meanwhile, the exile of the author found its fulfillment in the death of the author, espoused by postmodern critics. Now the very distinction between literary texts and other texts is broken down. Now all texts can be mined for their aesthetic value or their ideological usefulness or anything else the critic wants to find in them. The one thing those texts cannot do, or not permitted to do, is allow our ancestors to share with us the wisdom of the past, because we've got this barrier between us and the author. So the result is that today, if you try to apply the old method, the search for the author's meaning, grammatical historical exegesis, to any cultural document, people stare blankly at you as if you were speaking a foreign language.
Right.
One of the major reasons why, even when we had good arguments on the more recognizable issues in what was called the culture war, they had no traction. People just walked on by as if nothing had happened. To them, nothing had. So you can't say, well, this is what marriage means because that's what everybody meant by it for the entirety of human history. You can't say, no, there's no right to abortion in the Constitution because the Constitution doesn't talk about a right to abortion. No, you can't say that anymore because people like, what do you mean? We can find it there if we want to, because this is how we were taught to read when we were in school. And they don't even realize that this vast pit is opening up under their feet, into which they must eventually fall if they continue down that road.
Well, we even see this happening in the church, as you pointed out already. And Ron responded to, I think this is on Twitter this morning. Someone had put the myth biblical inerrancy is a 20th century concept, to which Ron replied, Tertullian, 2nd, 3rd century.
Well,
wrote,
actually,
quote,
that's the guy himself replied. I'm retweeting his tweet, and I'm
I
just
see. Okay.
saying it's a good tweet.
Yeah, the statements of Holy
It is.
Scripture will never be discordant with truth. Okay, so
It is
the guy who first posted it did the reply, demonstrating that it goes back at least to the 2nd century, this
goes
idea.
back farther than that.
Right. And, well, of course.
Due to the Bible itself, yeah.
My point then, my response was, does it seem to you that biblically illiterates tend to be also illiterate regarding history? Isn't that what we're talking about here? They're illiterate regarding not only language, but history.
There are a lot of people like that. And then there are other people who are illiterate in regards to history. They're just very selective in regards to the history they pay attention to, which has the same effect or even worse. Yeah, the sad thing is that this blank stare you get when you talk about the author's meaning is not limited to secular people outside the church. I can tell you that it happens in many students in conservative Christian colleges. They may tell you something very different when they're off guard in the cafeteria from what they put by rote on their hermeneutics exam to please their Bible professor.
Right.
Outside of class, they take it as self-evident truth, needing no support, that readers create meaning in rather than receiving it from the text. Readers, not authors. These students don't know it, but they picked up by osmosis the skepticism of postmodern hermeneutics.
Right.
Readers, not authors, are the source of meaning. Authors have no authority. Their presence at the moment of text construction has no historical or hermeneutical relevance. That would, horrors, limit and interfere with the freedom of the interpreter. The free play of the mind in the text trumps all other considerations. Now, these students typically don't know any of the jargon, but they've absorbed the assumptions. And few of their professors are equipped to challenge those assumptions. The Bible professors can refute the old higher criticism, but not the new hermeneutic. And their English professors had to spend their graduate careers pretending to take the chic nihilism of postmodern theory seriously if they wanted to get their degrees. Not all of them came through that experience unscathed. And many had never even been told that another view was even possible. Now, no matter what you say, even if you still call the Bible the Word of God and think of yourself as a loyal son or daughter of the church, once you have adopted this view, the authority has been transferred from the text to you, the individual.
Right.
Not only is there nothing to stop you from remaking the text or the natural world, in the case of the transgender movement, nothing to stop you from remaking the text in your own image. You've actually been taught that it's your right to do so, and that doing so is unavoidable. And anybody who says different is just naive and doesn't understand hermeneutics. Biblical authors cannot be made an exception to this principle when it rules the mind unchallenged. Oh, yeah, we've lost the culture war, and many of us have no idea how badly or how deeply. Many of our own children, even the pious ones, are more influenced by the culture at this critical point than they are by the church or the Christian tradition.
Can we pause for just a second here and make sure we nail down the postmodern definition of, or the postmodern procedure of reading and discerning meaning? How would you describe that they do it?
Derrida said that the free play of the mind in the text is the ultimate value.
Yeah, but if we could just sum it up in layman's terms here.
What that means is that postmodern hermeneutics is basically intellectual Calvin ball. Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin's game, where you get to change the rules whenever you want to. Derrida said, look, because God is dead, therefore there is no objective truth that is accessible to human beings. Consequently, there's no boundaries. Okay? So interpretation is a game we play. Imagine playing football on a field that has no sidelines and no end zone. See, the problem is if you got sidelines, you can go out of bounds and the play stops. And you don't get any more yards because you went out of bounds.
Yeah.
So the idea that there is a correct or right interpretation is like having a sideline. And that is rejected because it means that would stop us from playing our interpretive word game.
Uh-huh.
And what we want to do is fix it so that the game, the play of interpretation, the game never stops. Now,
is it the case, Don, just as you're talking this through, I'm thinking of other things that we see going on now, especially you wrote the article we're kind of referring to in 2017. Here we are 5 years later. Has it not only affected our ability to read historical information, does it affect even our view of science? Now it is no longer the case that you are male or female because it is simply up to the interpreter to decide what they are.
Yeah.
It's not objectively verified by science. So your DNA has nothing whatever to do with this. It is simply your interpretation of yourself that matters.
Yeah, science has resisted this radical relativism longer than the humanities did, but it's making its inroads even in science. So I don't know how many real biologists have bought into this stuff. They probably know better, but people on the fringes of science use the concept of science to try to support the very unscientific things they're doing, like gender transfer and that kind of surgery and stuff. But yeah, with the concept of truth and meaning having broken down to the extent that it has, you can't even insulate science from it in the long term.
Right. I think that's what we're seeing, and that's what it just intrigued me as I was listening to what you're saying. I'm going, this affects not just the reading of Scripture. It does not just the reading of the Constitution, which is newer than the Scriptures are, because it does affect the Constitution. People are illiterate on history, and it doesn't even matter because they've been trained now to believe and to act on what I put into the text is all that matters. And so I could read a text and have a totally different understanding than you have. Therefore, your understanding is no better than my understanding. In fact, mine's better for me than your understanding, both of the Constitution and of the Bible. And now it's moved its way to say, my understanding of the questions about science are based solely on my interpretation of me. Is that true? Is that where we're at? I mean, I'm not saying is it true.
I think that's an accurate description of a lot of people today. And of course, individuals are everywhere on this perspective, from old dinosaurs like you and me who think that meaning exists and that it can actually be gotten out of text because the author put it there, all the way to things that are so relativistic that it's hard to even imagine or describe them. Individuals exist all over the spectrum, but the culture, the society is definitely sliding down that slope toward oblivion. And the most serious part of the problem is that it's inside the church and not just out there in the world, because when the church can't even maintain its own doctrine because of this, the authority's been transferred from the text to the reader, but we're not honest about that. We still say we believe the Bible, only we believe the version of the Bible that we just made up. It's whatever. Now, can this disappearance of biblical authority, even though we still talk like we believe in it, can it be unrelated to the fact that according to many studies, Christian students are only marginally better than the world in their practice of Christian morality? I mean, if in a given community, it turns out that the average age of first fornication is 16.
Wow.
For Christians, it'll be 17. You're like, oh my goodness. All of the spiritual power of the Christian faith gets us 1 year of faithfulness outside of marriage. Statistically, well, it's because people are reading the Bible and it still says what it's always said, but they don't have to pay attention to what it says anymore. It's all relative. Meaning is in the eye of the beholder.
And it doesn't it also go to, now we were talking about educators and how this came to be. As we talk about the church, isn't it the case that many pastors are also teaching this by osmosis in the way that they teach on Sunday morning? I mean, the Bible, for some, I don't know how many, I haven't done statistics on this, but for some, is little more than a prop to get you to think that what they're saying is biblical in some way.
Right. There are a lot of pastors who are doing it by osmosis. And then there are guys who call themselves progressive Christians, or there's some other terms that are actually doing it directly, overtly.
Right.
And so it's a huge problem. Readers empowered to create their own subjective meaning, rather than exhorted to find the objective meaning left behind by the author, are foxes put in charge of the hen house when human nature runs up against the demands of the law of God. And that's the hen house we are living in right now. So here's why we lost the culture war. We had sufficient numbers to be salt and light. We had good arguments. We've got some good apologists making good arguments. They have no traction because where the battle really is on the source of meaning. And once the source of meaning is no longer the text of Scripture or anything else, then you can talk yourself blue in the face, but you're not really reaching people because it's going right past them. We'll say, hey, there's no right to abortion in the Constitution. The Supreme Court just made that up. And their response is not, oh my goodness, you're right.
Right.
It's so.
Right. Right.
What else
Right.
do we expect them to do? That's what they're supposed to do. It's like,
You know what? We're going to take. I want to hold that thought because I want to come back to that. We're going to take just a short break to hear from.
Yeah, from one of our sponsors, because recently in an emergency meeting at the Toxico Corporation, the project lead, Stu, said these protests are delaying the project and killing our bottom line. Foreman Larry said, yeah, all this over a few million dead fish. And PR spokesperson Pam said, yeah, we're the real victims here. Across town, a hedge fund manager consults with his lawyer. I feel so left out of the culture wars. I can't afford to be left behind. Where do I find the right victim status to bring me the professional success I'm looking for? Meanwhile, Phil is meeting with his career counselor, and he says, I've come to the point where I realize I don't have enough intersectionality on my resume. Do you think I should consider gender reassignment surgery to boost my job prospects? Well, now there's a solution for all these problems: the grievance industrial complex. At the grievance industrial complex, you'll find the premier manufacturer and recycler of fine grievance products. They provide grievances customized for your political, economic, and social goals. The grievance industrial complex works closely with you throughout the design and implementation process to ensure your satisfaction. And all grievance industrial complex products come with their patented moral high ground, which includes victim status, identity politics tactics, flawless far left ideology, and so much more. And free for a limited time, playing the victim card for terrorists is included with your grievance industrial complex membership. It's even better than the Harry Potter series, says Dr. S.J.W. Jones. The grievance industrial complex, because things are never bad enough already. So we need more grievance. We need more. And if we can interpret things the way we want to, we can come up with as many grievances as you can think of, I guess, right?
you know, our audience will probably get the satire here, but that's not nearly far enough away, actually. Things that people are saying seriously.
No, it's not. No, I mean, all of this is taken right off of social media and the
Yeah.
latest literature. Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't claim any
well,
originality here.
enough about our problem, which is we lost the battle on the issue of reading and where meaning comes from. And that undercuts everything we try to do on every other front in the cultural war. What do we do
does.
now?
One of the things that we've pointed out, we've done this in writing, we've done this on our webcast, we've talked about this a lot, is, and I picked this up from my friend Bill Hunsberger, told me this years ago, and I think he's right. In the first century, the average population believed all truth claims were equally true. Philosophers believed all truth claims were equally false. Politicians believed all truth claims were equally useful. And we have now re-achieved that belief system. There are no absolutes that we can tie anything to. It is all dependent on my view of truth and understanding, and I become the sole interpreter of what is true, at least for me.
Yeah. Like,
So
yeah.
the time we live in today is more like the first century than any other time in between, I would argue.
Well, other people have argued that. It sounded like you were trying to get to the solution, Dr.
Well,
Lee?
yeah,
I think we need to get to a solution. What do you say, Don?
So what do we do now? All right, we lost. What do we do now? Where is the battle, or where should it be now? First, most importantly, we realize that the battle is never finally lost because Christ is sovereign and he's coming back. Those facts guarantee long-term victory. In the short term, since we don't know when he's coming back, we're to be faithful while he tarries and occupy till he comes. Therefore, the battle we have just lost must be followed by another one that we fight more intelligently, with better recognition of our strategic position. Having lost the battle for faithful reading, We've lost the cultural privilege and initiative we once enjoyed in living memory. We no longer command anything perceived by our peers as moral high ground. Not at all. We are the new moral minority. Now, our position is much more, as was just being suggested, our position is much more like our brothers in the old Roman Empire, except that instead of being the edgy, new, challenging thing coming in, the way the first century Christians were, we're now the outmoded fuddy-duddies being swept aside. Seems to me that a four-pronged strategy is needed in the situation in which we find ourselves. First, we should not, in recognition of this situation, do what some are doing and give up or surrender or try to retreat back into our private religious ghetto. We should continue to advocate biblical positions politically, publicly, even politically, because they're right, wise, good are the only policies conducive to healthy human thriving in the long run. The unpopularity of biblical positions that are pro-life or pro-traditional marriage or pro-traditional family is simply an indicator of how badly those views need proclamation and defense. But we are no longer in a position to even pretend that they are a default setting or that they're in any way privileged because they were once in possession of a consensus in their favor. That situation belongs to an increasingly remote past. Failure to recognize this is one of the reasons we keep losing. We're still fighting yesterday's battles. How many times do I hear conservative Christians berating their fellow citizens for departing from positions they no longer remember ever having held?
Right.
Maybe their grandparents. Right. We're berating these people, and they have no idea what we're talking about, because what we got to do is start back from square one and do the hard job of evangelism and discipleship. But we'll get to that. So first is we don't give up and we don't retreat. I hear a lot of people, Rob Dreher isn't actually saying this in his books, but a lot of people are getting out of those books what they want because they're using the new hermeneutic and saying, well, we shouldn't have been dealing with those issues. We should just preach the gospel and withdraw from the public scene. And I think that's a mistake. Second, we have to prioritize reading and hermeneutics and the way they are taught as keys to our ability to witness effectively at all to the truth in all these other areas. You cannot very well argue that traditional marriage or the sanctity of life should be normative if norms are inconceivable to your audience as anything other than arbitrary impositions of power. Norms can't be conceivable if meaning, not to mention truth, is by definition in the eye of the beholder. So if you live in an environment where the very act of reading is taught by almost all the people who should be our most proficient readers, that is, English professors, seems to undercut the very concept of meaning and reinforce the absolute sovereignty of the individual, you're going to have a hard time making norms seem conceivable, much less believable. Where truth is nothing more than a fluid miasma of shifting perspectives, the exclusive claims of Christ might be accepted by a few, but cannot be taken seriously by anyone. So we need to be much more vigilant against all forms of the postmodern hermeneutic of suspicion, and much more aggressive in making the case for authorial intent as the foundation of textual meaning. Can authors communicate with their readers in their texts? The people who tell you they can't are saying this in texts in which they are doing, quite successfully, the very thing they deny is possible. The English professor who believes that authors can communicate with you in their text is now the most needed missionary on the planet. And sending him or her into the secular academy or even the Christian school is the most strategic mission strategy we can mount. Sadly, the church herself has become a mission field in this area. Does the Christian school or college you support have people on its English faculty who piously believe that deconstruction, for example, is just one more neutral technique that can be applied to text and it's something Christians should take seriously and learn from. Not that I'm advocating ignorance of it. People should be aware of the poisons in their cabinet.
Right.
You'd be surprised how many Christian institutions do. If you hire such people or contribute to their salaries or send your young people to study under them, you are aiding and abetting the enemy. And the end result will be more debased definitions, more losses in the culture war, and more murdered children. That's just the way it's going. So we got to put a whole lot more emphasis on reading, not just the process of translating letters into words and words into sentences, but understanding it. How do we do that? We have got to have an apologetic that's effective for meaning as something an author can put in a text and we can get out of it. If we don't do that, nothing else we do is going to make a bit of difference. Third, we must recognize the crucial role of the imagination alongside reason in cultural apologetics. Failure to take seriously the importance of literary and all the arts, of literature and all the arts, and the foundation of human minds and hearts was one of the reasons we were blind to the shift that took the ground out from under our feet until it was too late. We must not forget that the greatest apologist of the 20th century, C.S. Lewis, was the greatest apologist, not only because he gave us the rational arguments of mere Christianity and miracles, but also because he showed us what they looked like incarnate in flesh in the Chronicles of Narnia and the Space Trilogy. Most of all, because the two were seamlessly integrated in one unified vision of the wholeness and wholesomeness of Christian truth. Exhortation to sexual faithfulness, for example, will only be fully effective if it flows from sound arguments for why God's commands really are the expression of his love for us rather than arbitrary prohibitions. And those reasons will only be fully convincing if they are accompanied by compelling portraits of such faithfulness that make it genuinely imaginable as the only path to human thriving and fulfillment. We need Christian artists to be writing stories and writing screenplays and writing television shows that, instead of ridiculing traditional marriage, show it as the school of virtue that Martin Luther said it was. Because you can't do this if you can't even imagine it. This is one of the biggest problems why Christian young people are having such a hard time staying pure until marriage is they can't imagine that that's even possible.
No, they can't. And we adopt our worldview primarily, and you use the word already, through osmosis.
Yeah.
It comes from the people we know, our peer group, the books we read, the films we watch. We just sort of adopt things. There's no gate that prevents it from entering in, whereby we go, is this true? We don't ask that question. The second, you're talking about literature and films, and this is one of my personal bugaboos, is Christian imagination is stunted. Even if someone could be a good author, they tend to hold back because there are some Christians who don't really want you to paint humanity as it is.
Right.
Right. Where the bad guy really is the bad guy. And even the good guy may be fallible, may be attracted to sinful actions, for example. So you have one-dimensional characters, not three-dimensional characters, and it makes it laughable. I just finished. I love audiobook. 2 books written by a Christian author. I thought the stories were an interesting and imaginative storyline, but everything was about, how do I call it? Ed Havich and I have talked about this sort of kidnapping Jesus into the story. There's ways to include the Christian faith without having to sort of kidnap him into the story to be a Christian novel.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a big problem. And another one that contributes to not making any headway here is the church gets what it values.
Yes.
A, 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 a Christian, a person who's a potential Christian writer, uh, the church doesn't care, and it's not going to support him, and he's not going to have commercial success at first because he's not writing stuff full of sex and violence, and we're not going to support him, and we're not going to tell him that what he's doing is valuable. We're gonna paint the picture that if you're a really strong Christian who really loves the Lord, you're going to the mission field. And yeah, that's one of the things that you'll do if you're that kind of person. And I'm not against that message at all. I've been to the mission field. I've spent a good bit of time on it as a short-term missionary myself. But we're not giving the same value to things that are desperately needed, to where a person, if you want to be discipled as a future Christian artist, who are you going to find
Right.
that's even capable of helping you with that? You know, it's a real problem. Fourth, here's the fourth of my four prongs. We have to adjust our rhetoric to the audience that actually exists, not the one we think was here 2 generations ago. In other words, we need to stop berating people for departing from a position they no longer remember ever having held, and instead do the hard work of evangelizing and discipling them from scratch. Maybe from less than scratch. They're jaded and cynical about what they think Christianity is, and that's partly our fault. Not because we were wrong, but because we were and are stupid in our approach. Here's an example of this stupidity. On my way to church, I used to pass a billboard proclaiming a meeting where the Christian right was going to take back America. Well, America needs taking back. But have we no idea how this message is going to come across to the multitudes of non-believers who must have seen it on a public billboard? I mean, if I'm not a Christian and I'm driving down the road and I see this billboard, we're going to take back America, how do you think I react to that? No, you're not. I mean, we're out there spending our money to make our audience more resistant to the gospel than they naturally already are. This is ridiculous.
Right.
Can only reinforce all of their worst stereotypes and prejudices about us and put their guard up. But even as an in-house communique, where there could be some excuse for it, it didn't send quite the right message. We've got to win back America before we can even think of taking them back.
You know, Larry Generous said this, and he's absolutely right. He says, most people I know have no knowledge of history older than Obama. So when you have a group saying, we're going to take back America, they're going, what are you talking about? America's been like this as long as I can remember, which is like, I don't know, 22 years.
So we got to win back America before we can even think of taking it back. And to do that, we've got to get back to the basics in terms of evangelism and discipleship.
Yes.
Here's another huge component of our problem, why we lost the culture war, is that while we were misreading Scripture, we included the Great Commission in that. We act like we think that the Great Commission was to go into all the world and make converts. That's not what Jesus said.
No.
Go ye into all the world and make disciples.
Right.
Baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So bringing them to a point of public confession of Christ and identification with him and his church through baptism. Teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you, and lo, I will be with you from now to the end of the age. We think we fulfill the Great Commission when we make a convert And almost none of those converts for the last generation were made into disciples.
Right.
Consequently, we have churches full of people who have no concept what the biblical worldview is, no concept what sound doctrine is, no concept of how to actually practically live the Christian life in terms of its spiritual nuts and bolts. Consequently, they got lousy testimonies. Consequently, it's hard for the few of us who are still trying to proclaim the gospel to do it. It's a huge, stinking pile of spiritual manure that we have created.
Well, when you talk about spiritual
We call
manure,
ourselves Great Commission Christians, and we haven't even bothered to read the Great Commission and pay attention to what it says.
No. When you were mentioning about what's going on in the church and literature, Christian Matthias raised the question about music as well. And when I look at the church, it is being captured by the New Apostolic Reformation largely through the music of the New Apostolic Reformation that is being used in churches across the country that are not affiliated with the NAR necessarily, but are now imbibing on their theology because they're getting it through the music. There's, again, no gatekeeper. There's no discipleship. There's no training in how do we think. Or even...
there's no discernment, even coming from our leadership.
Can I look at that last point on your list again here?
We can. I bet we can. Yeah.
Aim our rhetoric at the audience that exists. Lately, every time I've thought of rhetoric, I've thought of a man named Sun Yat-sen, whose the 100th anniversary of his death will be in the year 2025. He is considered the father.
This man is still alive. Oh, that's a different song.
Yeah. He's considered the father of modern China. So he's the revolutionary that helped break away from colonialism and create the beginnings of modern China. But as he was approaching death, the two parties, communism and what was known in my lifetime as the communists and the nationalist Chinese, and began clashing. And they asked, Sun Yat-sen was so revered that they looked to him for wisdom on which one to go with. I don't know exactly. I'm just told this story by someone who knew a lot more about China than I did. And he said, when they asked him, well, which will be the future of China? Sun Yat-sen said, the communists have the rhetoric. And you have to understand that in the context of Chinese culture, because Chinese culture is multilingual. So what did it mean to have the rhetoric if you're multilingual? Well, in China, it boils down to the character system. Even though they all have all these different languages, they all use the same characters for the same meanings. So apparently the Chinese were just really good at written rhetoric in Chinese characters, really good at it. And what that got me to thinking is, okay, yeah, why are we here? Part of the reason why we're here, why you might say we lost the culture wars, I would think, is rhetorical in nature. In other words, the side that won, in our case, also had the rhetoric. Now,
they controlled the narrative.
They controlled the narrative, and they used rhetoric. So, what are we talking about when we refer to rhetoric? What does rhetoric mean? Well, it's persuasive speech. But in the New Testament, rhetoric isn't exactly considered, a good thing. Paul says, "We did not come to you with smooth speech." And I think other apostles, I forget if Peter made a similar statement. In other words, the rhetoricians of the first century, a lot of them were called sophists. They went from town to town and they charged money to peddle their teachings. And one of the things that they were really good at was smooth and flattering speech. And in other words, they told people what they wanted to hear. And so I think we do need to win the rhetorical war but we can't use their weapons.
That's a good point. Rhetoric, as I use the word, is from the classical trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric.
Right. Yeah.
Grammar is how to say something. Logic is how to say something true. Rhetoric is how to say something well. And rhetoric gets a bad name because people practice it without the first two.
Right.
They practice it as if putting the language together and making it sound good is sufficient. Politicians terrible about this.
We've abandoned
I
grammar.
was very envious of you talking about Florida because we've got the runoff, and that means we're going to be subjected to 3 more weeks of vicious political rhetoric from Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker, and there's no substance behind it. So we mustn't be afraid of rhetoric. Rhetoric just means.
I'm not suggesting. I'm not suggesting, but I am suggesting that.
And Paul, in denying that he was depending on smooth speech, his epistles are full of very carefully constructed sentences that really sound good in first century Greek, in Koine Greek.
Well, I'm just saying when I say we can't use their weapons, I don't mean we can't use rhetoric in any form, but we just, I think we could use Paul as a model for how to construct our rhetoric. But above all, I think we have to fall back on the fact that we have the Word of God. We have the Word, we have the book and the text that God says, this is what I will use to win people. So I do like using other writers. I'm not saying I'm not making that off limits. I mean, I love some of the arguments of C.S. Lewis. I love using what good apologists have written, but we have to be careful not to use I guess ultimately, we have to not depend upon our rhetoric. Use it, but realize your rhetoric is only as good as it conveys the truth of Scripture. So
a couple of quick things here so we don't lose everyone who's watching this. First of all, I am persuaded that God gifts each one of us slightly differently, and we will communicate to somebody else however we are.
Yeah.
And they will hear us, others won't hear us. So some people are going to hear me quite well, others are going to kind of ignore me. And that's okay because it's just who we are. So that's one. Two, I have found in my life asking questions of somebody up front is helpful because it tells me, A, what do they believe? B, what are they invested in that belief system, whatever it is? And then C, what sort of next question can I ask them? It's almost never the first question that is going to get me where I want to be. That's just informational. The second question is going to get them to have to consider if what they believe is true. I'll give you an example. I was had an opportunity to go through a Hindu temple. We had a former Hindu, had become a Christian, wonderful guy, he and his wife. And we're going to be our tour guides through there. And about, 8 of us, I think, showed up to go through this. And another couple just happened to pull in a parking lot and decided to go along with us on this little tour. And there was a guy at the temple who was supposed to act as our tour guide. And all the way through, he kept really saying the same thing. All roads lead to the same place. And this is an incarnation of Vishnu, and this is an incarnation of Vishnu, and we got all the way through, and I didn't really say much, I just listened. And one of our young guys asked, was Jesus an incarnation of Vishnu? So now we know where this guy's invested. Now he's got to make this question, this answer, because he's saying all roads lead to the same place. Is Jesus an incarnation of Vishnu? And he said, yes. And I said, I have a question. Would one incarnation of Vishnu disqualify other all incarnations of Vishnu, claiming that he's the only one? He goes, no, that's not possible. Then I have a question. Jesus said he was the only way, the only truth, the only life. All others are fakers. Is that true? And he stood there and he didn't know what to do with it. And finally he said, now we know where he's invested. Jesus lied. So he just shot
Ooh,
everything he's been saying down.
ooh. He couldn't have said, well, somebody was lying about what Jesus said.
No, he could have said that, but he didn't.
Could have said that, but that was a really bad choice on his part.
It was a
Yeah.
bad choice. And the two people had come unrelated to our group, heard that, and then that sparked a whole discussion with them because they were really entertaining the idea of converting to Hinduism.
Huh.
But that one question, that one exchange changed the whole conversation for them. So sometimes what we're doing isn't even for the individual we're talking to.
No.
It's for what I call the lurkers. It's the audience who's listening. They don't have a vested interest in the exchange. They don't have to defend anything, but they can take in the information as it's going on.
Yeah. No. And yeah. So I think I've said all I need to say. I think both of you gentlemen have given helpful balance to what I've said. So, yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay.
So, Don Wilson, I just want to say the link to the article I read is in the description panel, as well as your book. And we can show that because you have, let me see if I can bring this up here again. Oh, look how cool that is. Let's kind of go, oh, okay. See this conclusion. You cannot win the battle for theology and philosophy if you lose the battle for philology. What is philology?
Philology. Philosophy is philos, love, plus sophia, wisdom, the love of wisdom. Philology, philos, love, plus logos, word, the love of words. It's that branch of the study of language that studies how language is used in literature historically.
Okay. If we don't understand this, we'll be fighting shadows on an empty field, and the enemy is already abandoned for juicier prizes. It would be like
Juicy.
gunning a field with your cannons, putting in all of these rounds of bombs, but they left yesterday.
Yeah, pretty much.
So, ammunition, the inklings of reality. That's a new one, isn't it?
No, that's quite old.
Okay.
That was 2012, I believe, if I remember right.
Okay.
But it's still good. It has a lot of ammunition for dealing with these types of topics. Essays Toward a Christian Philosophy of Letters. So this
Okay.
is a book about why Christians should read, what they should read, and how they should read it,
Good.
which has the Bible at the central core of all of that, but
Right.
talks about the classics as well.
And then 95 Thesis, and that's also
Jeez.
available. I mean, I look at that price and I go, oh, I'm a missionary, but it is available on Kindle as well. So, or you could buy used. You could buy new, used, or on Kindle. So, but good ammunition. Cool. Don, I appreciate you so much being here. Are you going to be at ISCA, by the way? I'm not sure if I want to make that or not.
Yes, I will. I'm giving a plenary paper on C.S. Lewis as a role model for Christian apologists.
Okay, good.
Most people who talk about Lewis's apologetics focus on whether or not his arguments are valid. I'm going to focus on how Lewis can function as a practical role model for Christians like you and me that want to be apologists and be more effective apologists. And
I'm going to give another word. Philologist was our word for. Well, I'm going to give another word for the day because it describes me. Our friend Ed Havich told me about this one because it describes what he and I do, and that is a dysnopsophist. I am a
A
dysnopsophist.
dysnopsophist.
Yep, that means I've kind of perfected the fine art of chit chat.
Okay. So we fair one up.
yeah, I think you are.
Ron,
New breaking news.
Breaking news.
my next book, which will be out next year, is going to be a whole book on Lewis as a role model for Christian apology.
Okay.
It's coming out from DeWard, which is the same company that publishes Lydia McGrew, wonderful defender of the historicity of the New Testament. So I'm very excited about that. So watch for that. We'll have to have an episode about that one of these.
We will have an episode on that. Keep us posted when it's coming out. And Ron, would you walk us out of here?
Yes, our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon and D. Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys. Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Jolie Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham and Howe. Grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Director of Privacy Assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never.
Not even once. Well,
With that,
we are
adios.
terminated.
See y'all later.